we're not going to unload that truck. The Major says, you are going to unload that truck. I says, Major, I says, you talk like a man with a paper asshole. And that's not really reason I got to Alaska, but I think it contributed to it. And about that time I was supposed to report to Colonel Slack. He was our battalion commander from Pecos, and he said, and I was in front of Colonel Slack within minutes after my mouth popped off, and he says, did you really say that to Major Bright Bill? And I says, well, I says, I guess I popped off when I shouldn't have. So he said, well, I don't doubt the veracity of your statement. He says, but you need to be more discreet in your selection of language. So that was the first lesson I had in vocabulary, I guess you might say. And then what was the other one, Kathy? But while I was at Livorno in Italian, staging for the Pacific, Robert had hitchhiked down to see me. And he stopped at Colina, which is the culminus of the hill on Highway 64, and I had already gone from there. So he kept on going to try to find my unit. When he got to Leghorn, where I was staging, I had gone on a one-day leave with some friends of mine, and he found out that that was my unit, so they told Robert that he could sleep in my bunk that night, and I'll be back the next day. Well, Robert was in an enlisted uniform, walking across the company street that I was in, and my men would salute him thinking that was me. So apparently at that time he and I looked real alike, and I'm proud to say that we still look alike. But anyway, when I got back from this little 24-hour leave that I was on, and I can't remember where I went, but I do know that we were staging at Leghorn. And so when I jumped out of the Jeep after I got there, I saw these two guys approaching me. And I looked up at them and I thought to myself, well, one of them is Herb, and that's one of the other officers. And I says, the other one's Robert. And I said, Robert? I said, that's my brother. And sure enough, we were together, and it was then that he drove that Jeep at the baseball game, softball game, with these officers from this hospital unit, and Robert was so impressed with the fact that those guys were just as congenial as anybody else could be. And so that's the two that Kathy asked me to repeat, and I want to find out if there's anything else that she would like for me to say. I'm sorry that I had to use the vernacular there for just a moment, but Colonel Slack straightened me out. And when he said, I don't doubt the veracity of your statement, but he says, you were not very discreet in your selection of language. That made me kind of check that dictionary again and see if I couldn't straighten up my talk. However, another thing is when we went to Alaska, we were told, now men, you're up here now where there's no women, as there's nobody to answer to, but you're not supposed to use bad language. Straighten up your speech. And so Jim Caldwell, who was the other officer with me, he says, well, he says, the way we'll have to say things is something went wrong, you'd say, merciful heavens. So that's the way we talked after the time when we were up there. Now, Kathy, what else you got in mind? When Robert and Alice were going to get married, Robert did not have dress shoes. All he wore were cowboy boots. And Alice told him that you're not going to wear cowboy boots to the wedding. And so Robert was disturbed, and he came to me. I was an old veteran by that time. I'd been married for a little while and had one child at least. And so I said, well, Robert, I says, go ahead and wear those boots. I says, Alice won't notice. Well, I was mistaken. He wore the boots, and she did notice, and she didn't let him forget that she didn't approve of that at all. Well, I was the best man at Robert's wedding, and when I was supposed to hand the ring to the priest to put on Alice's hand, I dropped it. And I looked down there on the floor and saw that ring, and I says, how in the world am I going to get that ring without anybody noticing that I am stooping down to get it? I thought to myself, well, if I were barefooted, I could do it, but I wasn't barefooted. So I just stooped down and picked that ring up as quickly as I could and handed it to the priest. And I later asked everybody, I says, did you see me drop that ring? No. So no one saw it. And here was my consternation that I was going to be the joke of the wedding, but it didn't happen that way. And so Alice and Robert got married and lived a long, happy life. And I can't elaborate too much off of that, but when they would visit us and we would visit them, our children got together, and Mom and Daddy lived in that old two-story house behind the prison system, and my children still remember that house. And one time when I was back here in Sugar Land, I had a car. I'm not sure it was a rent car or what it was, but I wanted to take them back to see the house. I think it was vacant at that time, but I couldn't get past the prison guard there on the prison road that went to the house, so we never did get back there to see it. But we would visit Robert and Alice, and they would visit us. They would come out to Midland on occasions, and we were a congenial family together. And I told Kathy this little story about Daddy. He would give nickels to the Dirks kids. And so when he gave all the Dirks kids, which Dirks had a whole big bunch of boys, why, he ran out of nickels and ran out of kids too. So this one kid, Albert Dirks, put his hand out and looked up at Daddy and he says, "Ich hab noch kein." Well, that means in German that I didn't get one. So Daddy had to produce a nickel in a hurry to appease Albert. And Daddy was always that way. He would bend over backwards to help children and help people. And was Robert and Alice trait. As long as they were together, they helped people, and they were as congenial as they could be. And we tried to emulate them in our lives, in our family, and do what they needed. What the people were less fortunate than we could have enough to get along. I'm about talked out, I think. I'm sure I could tell you more. Robert used to visit us out in Midland, and even after Hilda passed away, and I married Dorothy after that. Hilda passed away on September the 28th of 1998, and Dorothy and I married on December the 30th of 2000. And so we live now on Lockheed in Midland, and Robert has visited us and spent a couple of days with us from time to time, and he would sleep in that back room of ours at Dorothy's house, and he would go out with our boys and on the farm, and he always had farm orientation, and our boys have cattle and cotton and that's right down Robert's line, and he enjoyed visiting with us, and we enjoyed having him, and we couldn't have asked for a better brother. And I don't mean to minimize my other siblings, Herbert and William. So there was Herbert and I and Robert and William were the four boys that our mama raised for Daddy, you might say. And Daddy told us that he didn't want to separate his boys. He wanted them to stay together. So Grandpa Meir introduced Daddy to Hattie Schwartz, and they got married and lived in Sugar Land on 4th Street the full length of time that we were children. And I can remember that the day that Grandma Schumann